Hi, it's Paddy Hirsch at Marketplace. So Italy, huge economy, 8th largest in the world, clearly a problem if it goes bad. But how did Italy get into this problem in the first place? Well, it's a bit like a man who buys too much house. So here's our buyer. His name is Jake. There he is. Now Jake, makes a respectable amount of money a year, say $100,000. And in 1993, Jake decides to buy a house. Okay, here it is. And this house was $1 million. And he didn't put any money down. So he took on $1 million debt, large amount of debt. And in 1993, his interest rate was 12.5%, okay? Now Jake's got a couple of kids, all right, who he sends to state school. And he sends them to state because, he realizes that he's got a large amount of money to pay on this mortgage, so he wants to live as frugally as possible, okay? And in 1999, something happens. His credit score bumps up. So in 99, he's able to borrow at 6%. So he refinances and he's borrowing a lot more cheaply now. Still the same size loan, but a lot more cheaply. So suddenly he's got some extra cash lying around. So what does he do? He takes his kids out of state and sends them to Stanford. All right, we all know that's kind of expensive. Then 2007 comes along and the financial crisis. And what happens? That's right, Jake takes a bit of a pay cut. He's now earning only $90,000 a year. And the year after, a couple of years after that, where we are today, what happens? Interest rates start to rise. Now his interest rate has gone up to 7%. And it's at this point that the bank looks at Jake and says, mate, you're in trouble, okay? You haven't been able to pay down any of the principal on your debt. You've got a very, very high expense with these kids going to school. And now your interest rate is going up, so you've got less money to put towards the mortgage, all right? So unless you're careful, you're going to lose your home. You're going to go bankrupt. So how is Jake like Italy? Well, very, very similarly. Jake, like Italy, or Italy, like Jake, has a vast amount of debt. And in fact, it's always had a very large amount. Since 1993, its debt to GDP ratio has been more than 100%. So it's a lot of debt. In 93, it was borrowing at 12.5%. And in 99, it joined the euro. And when it joined the eurozone, that pushed rates down. Like they were able to borrow much more cheaply. So the rates actually dropped below 6%. At one point, went to 4%. But then we had the financial crisis hit. But even before the financial crisis hit, the Italians started to spend money, okay? Because they were able to borrow at a lower rate of interest, they had a bit more money hanging around, so they started to spend that money on social programs all throughout the country. The South benefited because they started to get a bit more money, all sorts of things like that, and those were expensive. Financial crisis hit, however, and of course, just like Jake, who lost some money out of his job, so productivity dropped in Italy. There was less tax revenue coming through the door because companies weren't making as much money. And it was a problem, in terms of the government's ability to gather revenues. Today, of course, because of the problems in the Eurozone, interest rates are starting to go back up again. And so in just the same way that banks were looking at Jake and saying, you've become more of a credit risk, so banks are now looking at Italy and saying, we don't think you can support these 7% and higher rate of payments. You've got this huge outgoing, with all of these social programs. You've got less incoming because productivity has fallen, but your debt is still very, very large, and the interest rates on that debt is rising. So it doesn't matter how much money you've got coming in. You can be as a big economy as you want. Unless you can balance those books, you're going to go out of business. You're going to go bankrupt. So Italy's got some very hard choices to make. It can cut social services. It can maybe boost productivity, but it's got to get these reforms through its parliament in order to do that. And if it doesn't do that, it's not going to be able to make these payments. It could well file for bankruptcy, may have to leave the Eurozone, could destroy the Eurozone, and potentially destroy Europe and leave all of us very badly needing a drink.